My name is Gerald Whitfield. I am 58 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my own daughter tried to put something in my coffee. I want to say that sentence again, slower, because even now it does not feel real. My daughter, the girl I raised alone after her mother passed. The same girl who used to fall asleep in my truck on the way home from her softball games. She stood in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning and slipped something into my mug when she thought I wasn't looking. I was looking. I built Whitfield Industrial Supply from nothing. 40 years ago, I started with a rusted pickup truck and a notebook full of customer names. I sold bolts and gaskets to factories that didn't have time to wait on big distributors. I worked Saturdays. I worked holidays. I missed birthdays I still feel guilty about. But I built something real, something that lasted. 2 months ago, I sold that company for $60 million. I should have felt free. Instead, I felt something I couldn't name at first. It took me a while to understand what that feeling was. It was danger. Let me back up just a little so this makes sense. My daughter's name is Renee. She is 34. Smart, sharp-dressed. She has an MBA from a good school, and for the last 6 years she worked inside my company as Vice President of Operations. I gave her that title. I gave her that chance. I wanted her to earn her place, but I also wanted to make sure she had one. When I decided to sell the company, Renee did not take it well. "You built this for us," she told me, standing in my office, arms crossed. "Not to hand it to strangers. I built it so I could rest before I die, Renee," I said. "That's allowed." She didn't argue after that. She just went quiet. And in my experience, quiet is worse than yelling. Yelling burns out. Quiet plans. The sale went through in June. $60 million. Wired into an account I still don't fully know how to look at without my hand shaking. I kept a small consulting role, mostly out of habit. Mostly because 40 years of waking up at 5 in the morning doesn't just disappear because a contract says it should. Renee kept her distance for a while. She was cordial at family dinners. She smiled in photos, but there was something underneath her voice that I recognized, because I used to hear it in business partners right before they tried to cut me out of a deal. 3 weeks ago, she showed up at my house on a Tuesday morning, unannounced, holding a paper bag from the coffee shop down the street. "I brought you your favorite," she said. "Vanilla extra shot the way you like it." I want to be honest with you. Nothing about that moment felt wrong at first. She used to do this when she was in college, back when we were close in a simple, uncomplicated way. Back before money and companies and lawyers became part of every conversation we had. I turned to get 2 mugs from the cabinet. My kitchen window faces the backyard, and there's a small reflection in the glass if the light hits it right. That morning, the sun was low, coming in sideways through the blinds. I saw her reflection in that window. I saw her hand move over my cup. I saw something small and white drop from her fingers into the coffee. And I saw her stir it once, quickly, with the little wooden stick from the bag. For a second, I told myself I imagined it. My eyes aren't what they used to be. Maybe it was sugar. Maybe it was nothing. But my gut told me something different. 40 years of reading rooms, reading buyers, reading people who wanted something from me. That instinct does not turn off just because the person in front of you shares your blood. I turned back around slowly. Renee smiled at me and slid the cup across the counter. "Drink it before it gets cold," she said. I picked up the cup. I looked at it. I looked at her. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. I did not drink it. I set the cup down near the sink, told her I needed to use the bathroom, and once I was out of the room, I poured it out. Down the drain. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the mug. When I came back, she was scrolling through her phone at the counter, casual, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just watched me walk out of the room without touching my coffee. "Feel better?" she asked, not looking up. "Much," I said. I did not confront her, not that day. I want you to understand why. When you build something for 40 years, you learn patience. You learn that the moment you show your hand too early, you lose the whole game. I needed to know more before I said a single word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my study with the lights off, staring at the ceiling, running through every conversation Renee and I had over the past 2 months. And that's when I remembered something I had brushed aside without thinking twice about it. 2 weeks earlier, my lawyer, a good man named Douglas Meyer, had called me about updating my estate documents after the sale. "Your daughter's been asking about the trust structure," Douglas had mentioned, almost as a side note. "She called my office twice this month. Wanted to know how the 60 million was distributed. Wanted to know what happens if you become incapacitated. At the time, I told Douglas that was normal. Children ask questions about their parents' estate. It's not unusual, especially after a major sale like mine. Now, sitting alone in the dark, that word replayed in my mind like a warning bell. Incapacitated. On my desk, there was a photo of Renee at 7 years old, missing her front tooth, holding a fishing rod almost as tall as she was. I picked it up and looked at it for a long time. I tried to find the version of her that existed in that photograph, somewhere inside the woman who had smiled at me over a poisoned cup of coffee that morning. I couldn't find her. The next morning, I did something I had never done before in my entire relationship with my daughter. I called a private investigator. His name was Sam Coates, a retired detective who did quiet work for people who needed answers without drama. I met him at a diner outside of town, somewhere Renee would never think to look for me. I need to know what my daughter has been doing for the past 2 months, I told him. Financially, personally, all of it. Sam studied me for a moment before he spoke. You sure about this? Once I start pulling threads, you can't put them back. I thought about the way Renee's hand had moved over my coffee cup. Quick, practiced, like she had rehearsed the motion in her head before she ever walked into my kitchen. I'm sure, I said. Sam nodded slowly and opened a small notebook. Give me a week. I went home that afternoon feeling like a stranger in my own life. I sat in the same chair I had sat in for 20 years, in the same house I had raised Renee in, and for the first time I locked my bedroom door before I went to sleep. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself grief does strange things to people, and Renee had lost more than she let on when I sold the company. Her sense of purpose, her identity, the future she thought she was building. But grief does not explain a hand moving carefully over a coffee cup while pretending not to be seen. Something was wrong in my family, something that had been growing quietly for longer than I wanted to admit, and coffee was only the beginning of it. 5 days later, Sam called me with information that changed everything I thought I knew about my own daughter. Sam Coates asked me to meet him somewhere private, so I picked the back booth of a diner 2 towns over, the kind of place where nobody recognizes your face or your name. He slid into the seat across from me with a manila folder and set it on the table without opening it right away. Before I show you this, he said, I want you to understand something. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. I already crossed that line, Sam, I told him. Show me. He opened the folder. The first thing I saw was a printout of bank records. Renee had opened a new account 6 weeks before the company sale even closed, at a bank we had never used as a family. Small deposits at first, nothing that would raise a flag. Then 2 weeks after the sale, a single transfer landed in that account for $400,000. Where did that come from? I asked, though some part of me already knew the answer before Sam said it out loud. From the company's transition account, Sam said. The one set up to handle final vendor payments during the ownership handoff. She had access to it as VP of operations. She moved the money 3 days before the account was supposed to close out and get audited. I sat back in the booth, $400,000. Not enough to be an accident, not enough to be a rounding error, enough to be deliberate. There's more, Sam said, and turned the page. The second document was a call log, the kind Sam's contacts could pull with the right paperwork. Renee had called my lawyer's office 4 times in the last month, not 2, like Douglas had told me. Each call happened during business hours, when she knew I would be at physical therapy for my knee, a standing appointment she had helped schedule for me herself. She's been asking Douglas's paralegal about power of attorney documents, Sam said. Specifically, what would need to happen for someone to be declared unable to manage their own affairs. I felt something cold settle into my chest, the kind of cold that doesn't come from weather. She's building a case, I said quietly, against me. Sam didn't answer right away. He let me sit with it. There's one more thing, he finally said, and I think this is the part you need to see for yourself. He slid a photograph across the table. It was Renee sitting in a restaurant I didn't recognize, across from a man I had never met. My daughter was smiling in the photo, leaning forward, engaged in conversation, and the man had a leather folder open on the table in front of him with what looked like documents inside. Who is he? I asked. His name is Preston Cole, Sam said. He's an attorney, not just any attorney. He specializes in contested guardianship cases. elder incapacity claims specifically. I stared at the photograph for a long time, my daughter's face relaxed and confident, sitting across from a man whose entire career was built around convincing courts that people could no longer make decisions for themselves. "When was this taken?" I asked. 11 days ago, Sam said. 2 days before she brought you that coffee." I didn't say anything for a while. The diner around us kept moving, waitresses refilling cups, a family laughing at a nearby table, life continuing on as if my whole world hadn't just cracked open at the seams. I thought about Renee at 7 years old on that fishing trip, and I thought about the woman in this photograph, smiling across a table at a man who specialized in taking control away from people like me. "I need you to understand something, Gerald," Sam said, using my first name for the first time since we'd met. "This isn't just about money anymore. If she can get a doctor to say you're incapacitated, or if something happens to you that makes you unable to speak for yourself, Preston Cole can push through emergency guardianship paperwork in days, not weeks, days. And once that happens, she controls everything. Your accounts, your house, your medical decisions." "That's why the coffee," I said, almost to myself. Sam nodded slowly. "If whatever she gave you had made you sick enough, confused enough, even for a short time, it would have given them exactly what they needed to start the process. A hospital visit, a confused elderly man, a concerned daughter stepping in to help." I sat there with that thought sitting heavy in my chest, and for the first time since my wife passed away 12 years ago, I felt truly alone in my own home. I want to take a moment here and tell you about Renee, the real Renee, before all of this happened, because I think it matters. I think you should understand what I lost, not just what I discovered. Renee's mother, my wife Diane, died of ovarian cancer when Renee was 19 years old, halfway through her second year of college. I remember sitting Renee down in this same kitchen where, decades later, she would slip something into my coffee and telling her that her mother wasn't going to make it through the year. Renee didn't cry that day. She just nodded, quiet and steady, the way she always handled hard things. 2 days later, she withdrew from her spring semester and came home to help me take care of her mother during the last 4 months of her life. She learned how to manage medication schedules. She learned how to sit with pain she couldn't fix. She grew up fast, faster than I wanted her to. After Diane passed, Renee went back to school, finished her degree, and came to work for me the moment she graduated. I watched her build herself into someone sharp and capable, someone who understood the business better than half the men I had working under her. I was proud of her in a way that sometimes made it hard to breathe. I remember her first day in the office. She wore a blazer that was slightly too big for her, borrowed from a friend because she hadn't had time to buy her own work clothes yet. She sat across from me in my office, notebook open, and asked me to explain every part of the business, start to finish, like she was preparing for an exam she refused to fail. "I don't want special treatment because I'm your daughter," she told me that day. "I want to earn this." And she did earn it. For 6 years, she earned every bit of respect she got from the people who worked for us. That's what makes all of this so hard to hold in my chest. The woman in that photograph with Preston Cole, the woman whose hand moved so carefully over my coffee cup, she wasn't a stranger who wandered into my life looking for an opportunity. She was my daughter, the one who sat with her dying mother, the one who earned her seat at the table. Somewhere between the sale of the company and that Tuesday morning in my kitchen, something in her had changed, or maybe something in her had always been there, quietly waiting for the right amount of money to wake it up. I didn't know which possibility scared me more. That evening, I sat down for dinner at Renee's house, something we did most Sundays out of habit more than tradition at this point. Her husband, Marcus, was traveling for work, so it was just the two of us at her kitchen table. The same kind of setting where, weeks earlier, she had once talked to me about balance sheets and quarterly projections like it was the most natural conversation in the world. "You've been quiet lately, Dad," she said, cutting into her chicken without looking up. "Everything okay?" I studied her face for a long moment before I answered. I was looking for a crack somewhere, a flicker of guilt, anything that might tell me whether the woman across from me still had some part of the daughter I remembered still living inside her. "Just tired," I said. "Getting older isn't easy." Something shifted in her expression when I said that, something small and quick, gone before I could name it. "You're not that old, Dad," she said. and reached over to refill my water glass without asking. "You've got plenty of years left in you." I looked down at the glass she had just handed me, and for the first time in my life, I found myself studying my own daughter's hands like they belonged to someone I couldn't trust. "I hope so," I said quietly, and I meant it in a way she couldn't possibly understand, because sitting across from her that night, I finally admitted something to myself that I had been avoiding for days. If I wanted to survive whatever my daughter and Preston Cole were building against me, I couldn't just gather information anymore. I had to start protecting myself, legally, quietly. Before she made her next move, the next morning, I called Douglas Meyer's office myself. No assistant, no scheduling through the usual channels Renee might have visibility into. I asked for a private meeting, off the books, at his home instead of the office. Douglas had been my lawyer for almost 20 years. He handled the incorporation papers when I first started the company, sat beside me during the sale negotiations, and stood up as a groomsman at my wedding to Diane, back when we were all young enough to believe nothing could break us. "Gerald, you sound serious," he said when I called. "Everything all right?" "No," I said, "and I need you to keep this conversation between us." "Not even your paralegal," he agreed without asking why, and that evening I sat in his study, the two of us alone, a bottle of scotch, neither of us touched, sitting untouched on the table between us. I told him everything: the coffee, the bank records, the photograph of Renee with Preston Cole. Douglas listened without interrupting, his face growing more serious with every detail, until I finished and the room fell into a heavy silence. "I need you to be honest with me," I said. "Could she actually do this? Could she get a court to take control away from me?" Douglas rubbed his forehead, the way he always did when a problem was more complicated than either of us wanted it to be. "If she can get a doctor to sign off on a diagnosis of diminished capacity, and if Preston Cole files an emergency petition, a judge could grant temporary guardianship in a matter of days," he said. "Temporary orders don't require the same burden of proof as permanent ones. It would take you weeks, maybe months, to fight it back in court. And during that time, she would have control over your assets." "So the coffee wasn't about hurting me," I said slowly. "It was about creating a moment, an incident, a hospital visit, a confused episode, something a judge could point to," Douglas said, nodding grimly. "It's uglier than most people realize, but it happens more than you'd think. Family members exploiting the exact laws meant to protect vulnerable people." I sat with that for a long moment, staring at the amber liquid in the glass in front of me, untouched, same as everything else in my life that used to feel safe. "What do I do?" I asked. Douglas leaned forward. "We get ahead of it. Tonight, we start drafting an updated healthcare directive and a durable power of attorney, naming someone you trust completely as your designated decision-maker if anything happens to you. Not Renee, someone else." I thought about it for a moment and only one name came to mind. "My brother," I said. "Harold." Douglas nodded. "Good. We also need a full psychiatric evaluation, done proactively this week, from a doctor with an unimpeachable reputation. If Renee or Preston Cole try to claim incapacity down the road, we want a clean, recent evaluation on record proving otherwise." "And the coffee?" I asked. "The money she moved?" "That's evidence," Douglas said carefully. "But Gerald, I have to ask you something, and I need you to think hard before you answer. Are you prepared for what happens if we use it? Because once you go down this road, there's no version of your relationship with Renee that comes out the other side untouched." I thought about the little girl on the fishing trip. I thought about the young woman who dropped out of college to sit beside her dying mother. And then I thought about the careful, practiced way her hand had moved over my coffee cup, like she had rehearsed it. "She already broke it," I said quietly. "I'm just deciding whether I let her finish the job." 3 days later, I sat in the office of Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a respected neuropsychologist Douglas had recommended, someone with 30 years of experience and a reputation nobody could easily challenge in court. For 2 hours, she ran me through memory tests, decision-making scenarios, and cognitive assessments. At the end, she looked at me with a small, knowing smile. "Mr. Whitfield, your cognitive function is well within the normal range for your age," she said. "Better than normal, honestly. Whatever's going on in your life right now, it's not because of your mind failing you." I thanked her, and for the first time in almost 2 weeks, I felt like I had solid ground under my feet again. But solid ground doesn't last long in a war you don't fully understand yet, That same week, my brother Harold came to stay with me for a few days, officially to help with some home repairs. A cover story we agreed on, so Renee wouldn't grow suspicious about the new arrangements taking shape around her. Harold was 3 years younger than me, retired from the fire department, built like a man who had spent his whole life pulling other people out of danger. Having him in the house made me feel less like a target and more like a man who still had people in his corner. "You really think she'd go through with it?" Harold asked one night, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where Renee had once stirred something into my coffee. "Your own daughter?" "I didn't think so either," I said, "until I watched her do it." Harold was quiet for a moment. "Money changes people, Gerald. I've seen it happen in our own family before. Remember Uncle Pete? Fought his own brothers over a piece of land that wasn't worth half what the lawyers charged to fight over it. This is different," I said. "This is my daughter trying to take my mind away from me on paper, so she can take everything else in reality." Harold reached across the table and put his hand over mine, something he hadn't done since we were boys. "Then we make sure that doesn't happen," he said. 2 days later, everything changed again. Sam Coates called me late in the evening, his voice tighter than I had heard it before. "Gerald, I need you to sit down," he said. "I'm sitting," I told him, though I wasn't. "Preston Cole filed paperwork this afternoon," Sam said. "A petition for emergency guardianship evaluation. It names you. It's scheduled for review in 8 days. My stomach dropped. 8 days? Renee actually did it? "There's something else," Sam said, and I could hear the hesitation in his voice, the kind of hesitation that told me whatever came next was going to hurt worse than anything before it. "The petition includes a sworn statement, a witness statement describing an incident of confusion and erratic behavior. It's dated for last Tuesday." I felt my whole body go cold. Last Tuesday was the day of the coffee. "Who signed the statement, Sam?" I asked, though some broken part of me already knew. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Your daughter, Gerald," Sam said quietly. "Renee signed it herself." I sat there in my kitchen, phone pressed against my ear, staring at the same spot on the counter where she had slid that cup of coffee toward me 3 weeks earlier, smiling, telling me to drink it before it got cold. She hadn't just tried to hurt me that morning. She had been building a story the whole time, one lie stacked carefully on top of another, and now that story had a court date. 8 days to prove I still knew who I was, before my own daughter convinced a judge I 8 days. I kept repeating that number in my head like it might change if I said it enough times. Douglas met me at his office the next morning, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something close to controlled anger in his face instead of careful legal caution. "A sworn statement claiming erratic behavior filed the same day she tried to alter your coffee," he said, spreading the petition documents across his desk. "This isn't just aggressive, Gerald. This is fraud. If we can prove what really happened that morning, this petition doesn't just fail. It could end her career and Preston Cole's along with it. If we can prove it," I repeated. "How do we prove what she put in my coffee if I poured it down the drain?" Douglas allowed himself a small, tired smile. "That's actually the one piece of good news I have for you today." He explained that Sam Coates, back when he first started digging into Renee's finances, had quietly reached out to a forensic specialist as a precaution, someone who could test residue from drains and pipes if it ever became necessary. Sam had gone back to my house 2 days earlier. With my permission granted during a call I barely remembered making through the fog of stress, and collected a sample from the kitchen sink trap. The lab results came back this morning, Douglas said, sliding a report across the desk. "Zolpidem, a sedative. Enough in that cup to cause significant drowsiness and confusion within 30 minutes, especially in a man your age, on an empty stomach." I stared at the report, my daughter's plan laid out in clinical, undeniable language. She hadn't wanted to hurt me physically. She had wanted to create exactly what she wrote into that sworn statement. A confused, disoriented father. A concerned daughter forced to intervene. "There's more," Douglas said. "Sam pulled Preston Cole's financial records too. Cole doesn't just specialize in guardianship cases, Gerald. He takes a percentage. A finder's fee structured as legal costs based on the total value of assets under guardianship control once the petition succeeds. For an estate your size, that fee would be substantial." "How substantial?" I asked. $2.4 million, Douglas said quietly. I sat back in my chair, the number settling over me like a physical weight. My daughter hadn't found a lawyer who happened to specialize in guardianship. She had found a business partner, someone whose financial future depended entirely on convincing a judge that her father could no longer be trusted with his own life. "I want to talk to her," I said suddenly. Douglas looked up sharply. "Gerald, I strongly advise against that. Not without me present. Not without this being documented." "Then document it," I said. "But I need to look my daughter in the eyes and hear what she says to my face before this goes any further. I owe that to the man who raised her. I owe that to Diane." 2 days later, Douglas arranged a meeting, technically a mediation session, at his office with a court reporter present and Renee's own attorney sitting beside her. When Renee walked in, she looked composed, professional, the same sharp-dressed woman who had once impressed vendors twice her age in boardroom negotiations. But when her eyes met mine across the table, something flickered there. Not guilt, exactly. Calculation. "Dad," she said, sitting down carefully, "I want you to know this isn't personal. I'm doing this because I'm worried about you. Worried enough to put sedatives in my coffee," I said. The room went silent. Renee's attorney straightened in his chair. Renee herself didn't flinch, not visibly, but I saw her hand tighten slightly around the pen in front of her. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said evenly. Douglas slid the lab report across the table without a word. Renee looked down at it, and for the first time since this had all started, I watched something crack behind her composed expression. "You tested the drain," she said quietly, almost to herself. "You signed a sworn statement claiming I was confused and erratic that same day," I said. "A statement built entirely around an incident you manufactured yourself. That's not concern, Renee. That's fraud." Her attorney leaned over and whispered something urgently in her ear, but she waved him off, her eyes fixed on mine. "You were going to give it all away," she said, her voice rising for the first time. $60 million, and you're talking about donating half of it to some veterans foundation and a scholarship fund. That money was supposed to be ours. I worked 6 years for that company. I earned a share of what it became. I gave you a title, a salary, and an education most people would kill for," I said. "I never once promised you the entire company would be handed to you like an inheritance you didn't have to work for beyond that." "You don't understand what it's like," Renee said. "Watching everything you helped build get sold out from under you, knowing some stranger's committee is going to decide how it gets spent instead of the person who actually earned it." "I earned it, Renee," I said quietly. "Every dollar of it. You earned a career. A good one I was proud of. That's not the same thing, and trying to drug your own father to steal the difference makes you someone I don't recognize anymore." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Renee's attorney finally spoke up, his voice careful and measured. "I think we need to pause this conversation and discuss terms privately." But Renee wasn't finished. She looked at me, and for just a moment I saw something underneath the anger. Something that looked almost like the girl from the old photograph on my desk. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, quieter now. "I just wanted you to slow down, to need me again. Ever since the sale, you don't need anything from me anymore, Dad. You don't need the business. You barely need the company car service. What am I supposed to do with that?" I felt something painful shift in my chest. Some old, complicated grief I hadn't fully named until that exact moment. "You could have just talked to me," I said, "instead of building a case to steal my life from me." Nobody said anything for a long time after that. 2 weeks later, with the forensic evidence, the financial records, and Renee's own words on the mediation transcript, the guardianship petition was formally withdrawn. Preston Cole's law license came under review by the State Bar Association for ethics violations related to similar cases uncovered during the investigation. Cases involving other elderly clients whose families had used his services in strikingly similar ways. Renee was not criminally charged. I made that decision myself against Douglas's professional advice because some part of me still could not send my only daughter to a courtroom in handcuffs, no matter what she had done. But something between us had broken in a way that no legal outcome could repair. I changed the locks on my house that week. I updated every legal document with Harold as my healthcare proxy and power of attorney, and I sat alone in my kitchen one evening, staring at the same spot on the counter where Renee had once slid a cup of coffee toward me, telling me to drink it before it got cold. For the first time since Diane passed away, I understood what it truly meant to be completely alone. But being alone, I was about to learn, is not always the same thing as being without hope. 6 months passed before I heard from Renee again. In that time, I rebuilt my life slowly, the way you rebuild anything after a storm tears through it. I spent my mornings at the Veterans Foundation I had chosen to fund with part of the sale money, sitting in on meetings about scholarship distributions, watching young men and women who had served their country get a real chance at a future I was proud to help build. It gave me something the company never quite had time to give me before: purpose without exhaustion. Harold stayed close during those months, not hovering, just present, the way real family shows up when everything else falls apart. We fixed things around the house that didn't need fixing, just to have something to do with our hands while our minds worked through everything that had happened. Some evenings we didn't talk about Renee at all. Other evenings, it was the only thing either of us could think about. Douglas checked in regularly too, not just as my lawyer anymore, but as a friend who had watched me survive something most people never have to imagine. He told me once, over coffee at a diner I had started going to specifically because it had nothing to do with my old life, that he had seen plenty of ugly family disputes over money in his career. Most of them end in silence, he said. Nobody ever speaks again. You'd be surprised how rare it is for anyone to find their way back. I didn't know at the time which kind of ending I was headed toward. The call came on a Sunday evening in early spring. I almost didn't answer it. Renee's name still sat in my phone under daughter, and every time it appeared on the screen, something in my chest tightened before I could stop it. I answered anyway. "Dad," she said, her voice smaller than I remembered it, none of the sharp confidence she used to carry into every room. "I know I don't have the right to ask this, but could we talk? In person?" I sat with the silence for a long moment before I answered. "Where?" I asked. "We met at a small park near the house I used to share with Diane, a place Renee and I had walked together countless times when she was a little girl, back before company sales and lawyers and betrayal had ever entered either of our lives." She was already sitting on a bench when I arrived, her hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup she hadn't touched. I sat down beside her, keeping a careful distance, and for a while neither of us said anything. "I've been in therapy," she finally said, "since everything happened. Preston Cole's license got suspended. My marriage fell apart. Marcus couldn't look at me the same way after he found out what I did." I didn't say anything. I wanted to hear the rest before I decided what I felt about any of it. "I told myself so many stories to make it feel okay," she continued, her voice shaking slightly. "That you didn't need me anymore, that the company was half mine in every way that mattered, even if my name wasn't on the paperwork, that slowing you down for a little while wasn't really hurting you. It was just buying time. I believed all of it, Dad. That's the part that scares me the most. I actually believed I was the reasonable one. And now?" I asked quietly. She turned to look at me, and for the first time in almost a year, I saw something honest in her eyes instead of calculation. "Now I understand that I nearly destroyed the one relationship that actually mattered, chasing something that was never going to fill whatever was actually empty in me," she said. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't think I'd forgive me either if I were you. I just needed you to know that I finally see it, all of it, clearly." I thought about Diane, about the promise I made her in the hospital during her last weeks, that I would always try to hold this family together, no matter what happened after she was gone. I thought about the fishing trip, the softball games, the young woman who dropped out of college without hesitation to sit beside her dying mother. And I thought about the sedative in my coffee cup, and the sworn statement built on a lie, and the $2.4 million fee waiting for Preston Cole if the plan had worked. Forgiveness, I realized in that moment, is not the same thing as forgetting, and it is not the same thing as trust, which has to be rebuilt slowly, one honest choice at a time, not handed back all at once just because someone finally says the right words on a park bench. "I'm not ready to let you back into my daily life the way it used to be," I said carefully. "I don't know if I ever will be, not completely. But I don't want to spend whatever years I have left refusing to see my own daughter, either." Renee's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time since this entire ordeal began, she didn't try to hide them or explain them away. "I understand," she said. "I'll take whatever you're willing to give me. I know I don't deserve more than that." We sat on that bench for almost an hour, talking carefully about small things at first, safe things, the kind of conversation two people have when they're relearning how to trust each other's voice. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't the family I used to believe we were, back before money revealed cracks that had probably always been there, waiting for the right pressure to break them open. But it was a beginning. Over the following months, Renee and I met occasionally, always in public, always with the careful distance two people keep when trust has to be earned back one small moment at a time. She started volunteering at the same Veterans Foundation I supported, not because I asked her to, but because she told me she wanted to understand what I had chosen to build with the sale money, instead of handing it directly to her. I watched her show up early to set up folding chairs for scholarship interviews. I watched her sit quietly with elderly veterans who reminded her, she admitted once, of the father she had almost lost in a different, more painful way than any of us had expected. Harold remained skeptical for a long time, understandably so. Trust is earned in years, not months, he told me once, watching Renee help an elderly veteran carry boxes across the parking lot. Don't let your guard down just because she's saying the right things now. He was right, and I never fully let my guard down. The locks on my house stayed changed. Harold remained my healthcare proxy. The legal protections Douglas had built around me stayed firmly in place, not out of spite, but out of the hard-earned understanding that love and safety are not always the same thing, and a wise man learns to hold both at once. But something did heal between Renee and me, slowly, imperfectly, the way real healing usually happens. Not in one dramatic conversation on a park bench, but in 100 small choices afterward, each one a quiet proof that the person standing in front of me was trying, genuinely, to become someone worth trusting again. A year after that morning in my kitchen, I sat at a scholarship ceremony for the foundation, watching a group of young veterans walk across a small stage to receive checks that would help them start businesses, finish degrees, rebuild lives that had been interrupted by service to their country. Renee sat beside me in the audience, clapping for names she had helped select during the review process. "You did something good with it," she said quietly, leaning toward me during a pause in the ceremony. "Better than I ever imagined when I was so angry about the sale." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had once slipped a sedative into my coffee, who had signed a sworn statement built on a lie, who had nearly cost me control over my own life in pursuit of money that was never going to fill whatever emptiness she had been running from. And I looked at the young veterans on that stage, building futures out of second chances. "We both did something good with it," I said. "Eventually." She smiled, small and uncertain, but real. "I built Whitfield Industrial Supply from nothing, 40 years of Saturdays and missed birthdays in quiet sacrifice, and I sold it for $60 million, thinking that number would define the final chapter of my life's work. I was wrong. The real final chapter wasn't written in a bank account or a legal contract. It was written in a hospital room years earlier, in a promise I made to my dying wife. It was written in a park bench conversation I almost refused to have. It was written every single time my daughter and I chose, imperfectly and carefully, to try again. Money can buy almost anything in this world. But it cannot buy back trust once it's broken, and it cannot force forgiveness before someone has genuinely earned it. Those things have to be rebuilt slowly, one honest choice at a time, for as long as both people are willing to keep showing up. My daughter tried to take my life away from me on paper. Instead, somehow, against every reasonable expectation I had that Tuesday morning in my kitchen, we found our way to something neither of us fully deserved, but both of us were willing to work for: a second chance.